So today we're going to go through the process of taking this vector pattern that we've created and go through the steps in order to send it to the Cricut for it to cut out all of those pieces on vinyl. And we're going to take it even one step further than that, and we're going to make sure that the Cricut numbers all of our pieces for us with the pen tool. So we are starting here with the original stroke file. This is the file from the past tutorial on creating vector digital stained glass patterns. So if you want to see how we got to this stage, you can watch that tutorial first. But this is the stage that we ended up with. You can see that I have a couple of layers over here for different sizes that I wanted to render this pattern at. But we're going to start by just working with the original stroke file that we're not editing, and we're going to add the numbers to the pattern first. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to create a new layer here. We're going to name this one Numbers Do Not Edit. And for this piece, we don't have too many, and there really is no restriction on what font that you use. I have created a font for myself called the Monoline font, and it is an incredibly simple font. If you want to download it and try it, I will have it in my Discord to try out. But essentially, I have created this font myself, and it is a very minimal stroke font that each of the numbers has a line across the bottom so that you can see which direction is up, essentially. It's not an incredibly elegant font, but I find that it is very easy to read. It works out really well at pretty much every single size that I've needed it at, and I don't have any complaints with it. At some point I might update it so that it looks a little nicer, but it is working for me. So I'm going to add in a text box. So if you haven't added text boxes before in Illustrator, no big deal. You have two options. One is when you click the type tool, you can either draw a box that will auto-fill in with a bunch of text, but actually I don't want to do that. I just want to give myself a free place. So I have the tool highlighted. Instead of clicking and dragging, I'm just going to click. So it's going to say like, okay, here's a single line of font. I'm going to hit 1 and press escape to get out of it. So from here, you can up the font with your like typical font size, or you can just select it with the direct selection tool and you can make it bigger. If you hold the shift key, it'll keep it consistent. So I'm going to switch this back over to that monoline font, and I am going to just start. I will admit this is like not the most graceful part of the process for me, and if I ever find a better system for this, I will definitely share it, but this part is a little bit clunky. So I am just going to go through the process of taking all of these and putting a number inside of every spot. And ideally you want to make sure that that number is smaller than the piece of glass it's going to be on. So a way that you can really easily duplicate something that already exists is with that selected. If you hold down Alt and click and drag, you can see that little like double arrow shows up. It means that it's making a copy of it. So I can, whoops. So I can continue to make copies of this as I go. I am actually going to, because I have a little bit more space, I'm going to copy the one that's here, but then I'm going to make it a little bit bigger because I can. And it's just a little easier to read when it's a little larger. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I'll go through again. This is kind of a clunky part of the process. I have not found any way for this to go a little bit smoother, but it is consistent. It does work well. It can get a little tiresome when you have, say, 100 pieces in a pattern, but it's okay. It works. It's a slow going process, but it does work. So 8, 9, 10. I have admittedly in this process, I've forgotten to number pieces sometimes, or I've accidentally double numbered a piece. It's not the end of the world. Honestly, I could probably assemble this piece without numbers, but if I have the ability to add them, I might as well. So 10, 11, we're going to make that smaller in a second, and 12. So let me shrink this down, change that to 11, and then change this one to 12. And then I try to make sure that they're not too close to any of the edges. The Cricut is not always amazing about putting the drawn designs in exactly the same place it ends up cutting later. And as long as the cut is consistent, if the number kind of like goes off the edge a little bit, it's not a big deal. We just want to make sure that we can see what that number says. So I'll just usually go through the process of making sure it looks nice, but it's not really going to change it by any means. So all of that is good. And this just helps me to make sure that like I am going to know which piece is number 6 and which is number 9. All of the rest of these are pretty well designed. Like I made sure that the ones had the little notch at the top, so it was easy to tell which direction it was going. But just for my own sanity's sake, I put a line underneath of every piece. So we'll double check. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Great. 12 piece pattern. And that is pretty much all that we have to do at this stage. But what makes it easier and just tends to work better for the process of how the Cricut functions is we're going to take these font pieces and turn them into actual designs. So we're going to take away the ability to edit them as fonts, but it means that when it exports the file, it's not going to try to retain the information about the font. It's just going to know what it looks like. And that's all that we need. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to grab all of those numbers. Easiest way is just to select the layer that they are all on. And then we essentially just want to create outlines of these numbers. So if we go into the type menu, we're going to come down to create outlines. You can see you could also use Shift Control O to do that same process. So now you can see that instead of having actual editable text, these are just outlines and are essentially paths of that text now. They're all considered as groups because it knows that there's multiple pieces for each of them, and that is totally fine. It's going to be even more pieces when you look at like a number like 12. It's going to have like multiple compound paths in there. That is totally fine. That's not an issue for us at all. So now we know that we have our numbers and our stroke at the same size. If we wanted to create a different pattern size, so we before talked about doing an 8-inch and a 12-inch size. Ideally, you would want to create your numbers before you did those so that you can resize everything at the same time. But you could go through the process now if you had already created them. So for example, if we have our 12-inch one that's here, if I create a copy of these numbers and just call them numbers 12 inches tall, and let me move them up here so they're with the 12 inches one. And I select all of those. If I hold the Shift key down, I can make them bigger. Oh, let's turn this other one off because that's distracting. If I select everything that's on here, I can get this rearranged to be that size as I need to. So it's not a big deal if you happen to do it later, but ideally you would do it all at the same time when you're doing a resize. So let's say that we wanted to take our pattern, and again, we're working with the do not edit files here. We know that our numbers are good. We know that our stroke is good. Another option that you can do is you could make a numbers layer that hasn't been outlined yet in case you feel like you do need to go back and make changes. But I am pretty confident in this, so I am okay with saying we've already decided that this is the stroke that we're going with, so I am okay with outlining these numbers. Also, it's not a huge deal to just create new numbers if I needed to and then re-outline them. So let's say we want to do this at 9.5 inches. So that's one we haven't done yet. So I'm going to take both of these layers and I'm going to make copies of them. I'm going to turn off the original ones. And here I'm going to say numbers 9.5 inches tall and stroke 9.5 inches tall. So you can put this in any order. You can see that before we were sort of putting the height first and then other pieces later. It's not a huge deal. However, it's going to make sense for you to keep track of it is totally fine. So I am going to just leave it like this. I think that is no big deal. Because the outside of the pattern and the numbers together, if we select both of these, the numbers don't exceed the outside of the pattern, so we don't have to worry about them interfering with the height if we select both together. If for whatever reason you have anything in this layer that's outside of it, you're going to want to make sure that you get rid of that because we want to be able to set the height of both pieces at the same time. So if we come over to properties, on our height right now, it says it's 7.9 inches tall. And we said we wanted it to be 9.5. We have the lock here, which means it's going to proportionally change both the width and the height based on what we enter. So we're going to put this in at 9.5 inches height, and it adjusts both the numbers and the stroke for us. So here, numbers, stroke, 9.5 inches tall. Again, we're not working on our do not edit layers. We're only working on the ones that we are selecting based on the height we're using. So to double check, our numbers are paths. That is what we want. That's going to be the easiest way to send them out. But right now we are still looking at a stroke file for our actual lines. So we need to go ahead and expand those into an actual shape. So go ahead and just select your stroke layer because your numbers are already turned into a shape. And we're going to do essentially the exact same thing. We're going to create outlines, but we're not going to use the type drop down because type would be for text information. We're going to use the object drop down because the lines are objects. And we're going to go to path, outline stroke. So now we have all of our individual pieces outlined. And then we just need to go through the process of merging them all together because that's a lot of individual paths and that's a little bit complicated. So we're just going to unite all of those paths together. I do remember that when we did this pattern initially, we had a little bit of a piece here that we didn't want. That's not a huge deal. We can go ahead and select everything that's in this path. If we go before we merge them, if we back up one step to when they were all as individual paths before, if we go to the shape builder tool, if we hold down Alt or Option and you get the little minus sign, I can just get rid of the piece that I don't want. So now I will go ahead and merge all of these together using the unite function. Zoom back out here. And now everything looks good. We're at the right height. We're at all of the size we want, and all of our numbers are in the right places. It is totally fine that these are on two separate layers. That is not an issue for us whatsoever. We're going to have no problem exporting the SVG like that. So we are now at the stage where we are going to send this over to Cricut Design Space. So the first thing we need to do is we need to export the file. So I have only those two layers selected right now on the board. Everything else has been hidden. So I'm going to go and export this file. So you can see here that this was the original file that we exported last time that doesn't have any numbers on it. For this one, we're going to say sunrise suncatcher with numbers, and we are still going to use an SVG. So that is exactly what we want. We don't need to worry about any of these use artboards or anything like that. We're just going to export that file. The options that come up here are nothing that are going to affect anything that we are doing in Cricut. So the automatic ones that come up are totally fine. We'll press OK. So now we need to head over to Cricut Design Space. So we're going to open the program up and keep going from there. Okay, so inside of Cricut Design Space, we've opened a brand new project and we need to import our file into the system. So we're going to go to upload and we're going to bring in that SVG file that we just created. So we're going to upload our image and we're going to click browse and we're going to go into the sunrise suncatcher with numbers. And that is exactly what we want to see. We've got all the numbers. We've got the piece on the outside. Something a little strange looks like it's happening with the 7, but we'll see if that's actually there or if it's just a strange thing that's happening on the preview. So when we do continue, let's see if we can zoom in here. Yeah, it looks like it's just a little something odd on the preview. So we are all good there, no worries. And because this is an SVG file, there is nothing that we need to do to it. If you are uploading something like a PNG or a JPEG, you may have to go through and like tell it what parts of the file to erase or anything like that. We don't have to do any of that process. This is automatically going to upload exactly what we are looking to cut at exactly the size we told it to cut at. So there is nothing that we need to do to this. So we're just going to press upload and bring it into our canvas. So now you can see there is a slight amount of height that gets added to this. It is an incredibly nominal amount, but you can see that it is somehow added 0.04 somehow inches, or yeah, 0.041 inches to this. I am not going to worry about that. It is an incredibly nominal amount of a difference that really isn't going to change much. when we go to do the actual height of our piece. That really is because when we did the stroke initially, the stroke was in the center of the line. So what we are actually getting is like the slight amount that was added on the outside of that, but it is not something that actually concerns us. So that's why it doesn't actually say 9.5 inches. But if you want it to say that, you can. Just remember that this black line on the outside isn't actually going to be any pieces of glass. So if you're trying to fit something into something else perfectly, you may need to make adjustments to that, but that is why technically we are seeing a slightly different number, is because originally when we created the stroke line, it was going through the center of this black line, and so we changed it so that it did the outline stroke. You do technically have the ability, if you go back to Illustrator, if you're on your original stroke file, if we go back to the do not edit stroke file, if we wanted it to truly be that size on the outside, you would need to make sure that you had one solid path that contained just your outside pattern piece. And inside of the properties of the stroke itself, you can see here that there are 3 options for aligning a stroke on a closed path. If you have an open path, this isn't going to work, like these individual lines are open paths, but the solid closed path on the outside does allow you to choose whether you want the stroke to run straight through the center, be aligned to the inside, or aligned to the outside. So if we did truly want this to be exactly 6.5 inches tall, if we change the stroke so that it sits on the inside of that closed path, you can now see that that little red line isn't running through the center, it's running along the outside. But what you do end up getting with that is, while we were being very diligent about lining all of our paths up together, you may have a bunch of little chunks that you have to chop off now. So I usually just accept that that nominal amount of stroke difference isn't going to affect my pattern overall, but it is something to keep in mind that may be an issue if you are going with incredibly precise designs. But for the sake of what we're doing, something adding 0.04 inches to something is likely not going to make a difference. So if we come back to our Cricut page here, we are going to send this now to the machine. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to make sure that it is set up so that the numbers will get drawn on and then the lines will get cut out. So right now it is treating the entire thing as one single piece, but recognizes that there are 2 sections inside of here because we had our numbers on one layer and our cut was on a separate layer. So it knows that those are separate pieces. If I open up the layer that had all of the numbers on it, you can see that each of those individual compound paths is coming in as its own piece, and ones that were double numbers, like 10 being a 1 and a 0, is an additional grouped compound path. None of this affects how we do things, but if you needed to move stuff around, it might be good to know that like 10 is known as a group, but it is recognizing that the 1 and the 0 are 2 separate paths in the system. But for our purposes, all we need to do is make sure that the operation that is attached to each of these is appropriate. So basic cut is the operation we want to use on the lines. We want it to cut out the vinyl. And then on the numbers, we just need to change the operation from basic cut instead to pen. And that's it. And it may look like you're ready to go at that point, but it's important to see what might end up happening if you forget to do this one other step. So right now everything looks good. If I press make and I send this to my machine, sure, let's go ahead and save this. Sunrise, sun catcher, save. If I go to send it to the machine, well, that's certainly not what I want. I definitely don't want all my numbers to just right next to each other. That isn't going to help me at all. So the step that we missed is that even though it looks like it knows that these pieces are grouped together, Cricut doesn't assume them to be attached together. So we need to tell them that they are attached together. So just select the entire piece itself and click the attach button. So now inside of the attach, it has the group with the 2 layers underneath of it, but it will make sure that they all stay in the same spot compared to one another. So now if we hit make, it's going to show us that we have our pen and basic cut, And it looks a little weird because it kind of doesn't show you where the pen part is going to draw, but we're good. It's not showing us individual drawn on lines now. It understands that this one piece of vinyl is getting both the pen operation and the basic cut operation. So it's showing us what that looks like. The numbers are there. It's just that it is anticipating that we're using a black piece of vinyl because the color of this was in black. So if you want to be able to see it clearer, what you can do is you can change the color of this basic cut to something different. So let's pick like yellow so that it hopefully should make it very easy for us to see. So now if we click make, we can see both the lines and the numbers together. So if you're running into that issue and you're trying to figure out why you can't see any of your numbers, it's most likely because back in Illustrator, you probably did your numbers in black, which would make sense, and your stroke was also probably in black. When it sends that over to Cricut, the software retains the color information, and it may cause you to end up like not being able to see your design. So if you want to be able to see that all together, you can just change it to a color that's not black, and then you'll be able to see what you're looking at. So at this point, the only thing that we need to do is send it to the Cricut. So me personally, I use a universal pen adapter, and it allows me to put a Sharpie fine point into my machine. As far as vinyl goes, I opt for Oracle 651 matte vinyl because I find that the pens adhere better to matte vinyls when they're going to get soaking wet in like the grinder or the ring saw, as opposed to glossy vinyl. So I prefer using white vinyl unless I'm cutting white glass. So in the very rare occasion that I will need to cut white glass for something, it's usually only a piece here and there, I will cut those pieces out on black vinyl. If it's an entire design like this, you can't really set one piece to be a specific color. You'll have to cut the whole thing in one color. So if it's a design where you have white and black inside of the same design, you may need to pull out those pieces individually, which I will show you how to do next in case your design is too big to fit on your Cricut mat. But just know that if you're cutting the whole thing in one go, you should be good at this point. So we would just press continue. However you load a pen into your machine, you're going to load the pen into your machine. Again, I use a universal adapter. There are many built-in adapters or pens that Cricut has options for. I just find that using a Sharpie is going to give me the most longevity when those pieces are getting wet during the grinding or saw using process. So from there, I just choose vinyl and I go. There's nothing else that I need to do at that point in the process. Just make sure that I have a pen loaded into clamp A and I have the fine point blade loaded into clamp B. So at that point, that is everything that you need to do in order to send it to the Cricut. Now, if for some reason your piece is too large to fit onto the mat, you're not going to be able to send the entire cut at once. So say if we made this much, much larger, which we can't just go and do that in Cricut, right? If we took this and we said, actually, we want this piece to be 12 inches wide, which is larger than the mat accounts for. That's not the way that we want to do it because now the gap between the pieces of glass is far too large for a 12-inch piece. So we need to go back to Illustrator and we need to update the width of this piece. So here we said this was 12 inches tall. We're going to go 12 inches wide is a very, very large piece. It's not really a sun catcher at that point. It's pretty much a window panel. But for the intents and purposes of this tutorial, we will go with something that is wider than the Cricut is capable of cutting. So we're going to come back to our two do not edit files. We're going to make copies. We're going to turn off the do not edits. And we're going to say that this is 12 inches wide. And for stroke, same thing, 12 inches wide. So then again, we're going to grab both of these at the same time. You can click them either by selecting what's on the layers or just grab everything that's on the page. We're going to go into properties, and for width this time, we're going to set this at 12 inches. It's very, very large at this point. If you would like to make your artboard a little bigger so that you can see it, you can certainly do that. It won't affect how the file exports, but it is sometimes a little easier to see if the artboard is larger than the design is. So again, because we haven't edited this stroke, it is still a working stroke. We are setting our gap at 0.65 millimeters because that is what we determined in our previous tutorial. We're setting it at 0.65 millimeters of width between our pieces. So then at this point, all we need to do is we need to, same thing, make those expanded to be actual shapes and not lines. So same thing we did with our numbers. We're going to ensure that they are paths, which we don't need to continue to extrude them every time because they are never going to change. The number will always stay as a monoline number. So it's already expanded, no problem there. But for our stroke, you can see it still has the red line running down the center. So we're just going to take everything that's on that layer and path outline stroke. So now it is all together. Again, I should probably just fix this pattern at some point so that I don't have to keep doing this. But come down, if you have anything that you don't want, and your shape builder tool, press Alt to get the minus button and get rid of it. So now we can go ahead and unite all of those together and we have one solid piece. Now, if we try to send this to the Cricut, let's say we go through that whole process, right? We only have these two layers visible. If we do File, Export, and we do Sunrise Suncatcher with numbers 12 inches wide, export, and we try to bring this into Cricut. Let's get rid of this one. It will let us bring this file in. There is nothing that is going to stop us from doing it. But if we try to send it to the machine, you can see, hey, there is an error with this. This image is too large. You need to reduce it to at like no more than 11.5 inches wide or 23.5 inches tall collectively, right? So this is too wide on all sides, right? Like it's just not going to fit. Well, it might be okay height-wise. Barely. It's barely okay height-wise, but it is too wide, so it's not going to fit. So sending it as one solid piece is not going to work for this, which is totally fine. That's no big deal. So we said in the original tutorial that what we can do is we can have both the lines and the inside pieces. If we pop back and look here at this piece that we did on the 8 inches tall from the original tutorial, you can see that we have all of the paths of the actual pieces of glass as well as the compound path. That is what we can end up sending to Cricut instead. We can send all of these individual paths, or we can send the compound path, but if the compound path is too big, then we can resort to only using the individual pieces. So on our 12 inches wide, let's turn our numbers off for right now because we don't need those numbers. We're going to grab the entire piece so that we can see it's there. And we're going to choose the divide option, which now gives us all of those individual compound paths, or gives us the single compound path and then all of the individual pieces of glass that are making up this piece. Here is the part that is a little bit frustrating. We did all this work to make sure that our numbers are here and they are attached in the right spots. But unfortunately, if we send this information, let's turn off the compound path. All right, so let's just grab all of the actual paths themselves for right now. So let's not worry about the compound path, and let's change these to a color that we can actually see. Not black though. Let's change them to, like, again, a light yellow. Makes it easy to see. If we turn off our compound path, we just hide it. We can see just our pieces here. If we send this information to Cricut, it is not going to attach these pieces together correctly. So it does mean that there is going to be some amount of manual labor that is required inside of Cricut Design Space. Again, I don't really have a fix for this right now. If I ever come up with one, I will be sure to let you know, but it does mean that this part of the process tends to be a little bit more irritating, but it will still allow you the ability to have Cricut write your numbers down and be able to have it do everything for you, cut your pieces, have them numbered, all of that. So let's go ahead, and we don't have the compound path selected, which is fine because we already know it's not going to work for us. So let's just go ahead and export what's here. So we're going to do File, Export again, and 12 inches wide pieces. Export. So now, if we go back to Cricut again and we upload this file, which one do we have here? 12 inches wide pieces. We're going to get all the pieces and we're going to get all of the numbers, but if we try to attach these together, it's going to again say, hey, that piece is too big, I can't send it to the Cricut. And that is true, it is too wide to fit on that mat. So if we detach these, you can see here that the numbers and the cut pieces are still on two different layers because that is how we exported them out of Illustrator. But if we try to send this right now to the Cricut, it's going to go back to doing what it did before, right? It's going to try to like draw the numbers and the pieces separately as individual concepts or individual ideas because it doesn't realize that we want them attached. So here is the part that is tedious and frustrating. And at least this is only a 12 numbered piece or a 12 piece sun catcher, so it's not the end of the world, but this definitely gets frustrating when you have like 100 piece pattern. So keep that in mind. Again, if I ever come up with a better solution for this, I will 100% absolutely let you know. So the first thing that we're going to want to do here is we're going to want to ungroup these pieces so that we can move them around individually and attach the numbers to the pieces they belong to. So we're just going to go here and we're going to ungroup all of these individual pieces, and we are going to do the same with the numbers. We're going to ungroup them. Now, thankfully, it still keeps 12 as a number grouped together as a number, so that is fantastic. So they don't have to like run away from each other, but just know that everything else is going to have to be handled pretty manually. So what I will tend to do is start at one side and grab the piece and the number. Whoops, don't do that. And hang on, I'm going to ungroup all of this so it stops trying to select everything at the same time. I'm going to grab the piece and I'm going to grab the number. This is the very, very frustrating part about working in Cricut Design Space, trying to design here. If I try to grab from here, it's going to think I want to grab this 11 because of how wide the selection box is. It is frustrating, I am not going to lie. So you're going to have to work very diligently on what you're doing. So I've selected both of the piece for number 12 and the numbers for number 12. You can see they're both selected there. And I'm going to attach those together. Honestly, what I will do is I will zoom out pretty far here and I will put this to the side. So now it is out of my way. And I will do the same thing now with piece number 11. I will line them up and attach and then push them to the side. It really doesn't matter where they end up because they're all going to end up in random places at the end anyway, but they're all numbered, so that's all that matters. So I'm going to do this. It's a little tedious. It'll take a second, but I'll be right back. Okay, so now all of our pieces are attached to a number. So now if I send this to the Cricut, it will put them all on individual places so that they at least all have numbers attached to them. They're a little bit wonky. If you want to try and save more material, you can go through the process of trying to set these up actually with their own pieces in the right place beforehand, or if you're just okay with it using whatever it's going to use, you can just let it cut. So if you do want to try to conserve some material, what you can do instead is I will give myself a shape, a square, and I will make that square, depending on if you have a 12 by 12 mat or a 12 by 24 mat, make it 0.75 inches shorter in each direction. So I'm going to do this as 11.25 wide. And let's say I have a 24-inch mat. I'm going to unlock this and I'm going to say that this is 23.25 inches tall. And that is actually smaller than what its full dimensions are, but that means I don't ever have to worry about possibly not having enough space or anything like that. So what I am going to do is I am going to now pick up my pieces, and let me push this all the way to the back here so it's not in the way. send to back, arrange, send to back. There we go. So what you can do at this point is you can try to go through the process of figuring out, what could possibly be the a more economical way to fit these pieces on here so that they don't overlap. It is somewhat tedious. It takes time, but if you really want to make sure you're not wasting extra vinyl or anything like that, it might be worth that time to you. So you may be able to say like, all right, that's going to fit there. I can grab this piece. That one I can put right there. There's a number 8. I don't know if I can get that 4 on there. I can maybe get that 4 if I like flip the whole thing over. That could work. Yeah, I can put it there. That like barely fits. Again, you can rotate pieces. Because we were really diligent about making sure that there was a line underneath of each of them, it really doesn't make any difference. So you can go ahead and adjust these as much as you would like to. Just make sure that you don't accidentally resize them in the process. Again, I try not to go through this process often in Cricut Design Space if I can avoid it, because the program is a little challenging for design purposes. So let's say that that is probably the best we're going to get out of that. We'll grab our pieces that are all here. For now, I'm just going to move this square out of the way. If we grab all of these and then press attach, now we can treat those as a single unit. We can do the same thing again, right? So try to get our last pieces, see if we can get them all on one piece of vinyl here. It looks like we totally can. I'll just turn this one to the side like that. And then again, go ahead and shift that out of the way and we'll attach these together. So now if I go to send it to the Cricut and I press make, oh, I guess we can get rid of this since we don't need it. Or we could turn it off if you didn't want to delete it. So now it's only going to print on 2 of these big mats because we have determined that those will all fit. That's why I always tend to use something that's a little bit smaller, because I know that there's going to be no question, because this can go larger, like up to 11.5 inches wide. So it's saying at least one of your inches is larger than 11.5 inches in height or width. That's saying that it's using the long mat. That's totally fine. So we say, yes, it's going to go on the 12 by 24 size mat. So if you are making a piece that is this large and has this large of pieces on it, you may want to use this process to try and keep things tidy so you don't waste a lot of vinyl. The price of vinyl, thankfully, isn't too astronomical, but we certainly don't want to waste things if we don't need to. So at this point, it's going to be the same thing. However, you'll notice that we haven't set this up yet for it to actually send these as cut files and draw files. We're going to have to go back through the process of making sure that these are actually listed as pen files instead of cut files. So it probably would have made sense for me to change all of the numbers when they were still grouped together. That's on me for forgetting to do that. But at this point, we just need to go and we need to make sure that they are all changed to being pen. So order of operations can be very helpful. But if you miss a step, it's not the end of the world. You can always go back and you can update it. It may just take longer because now there's no one easy way to grab all of the numbers at the same time. So learn from my mistakes. But say you go through that whole process, you get everything selected. Let me do that real quick. All right, so now all my numbers are listed as pen instead of as cut. So one more time, you can send this to make sure we're doing it correctly. This is what we want to see. We're using both the pen operation and the basic cut operation on this mat, and we're going to see the same thing on the second one as well. And this way we know for sure that this is going to be piece number 3. This is going to be piece number 5. We turned 11 on its side, but no worries. We already attached it together beforehand. So we know that when we go to line these pieces up, the lines underneath of 11 should be parallel to the floor with that piece. So that is how you are able to send the pieces from Illustrator all the way out to your Cricut. Now, I will say that you should be able to do the same thing with a silhouette. I do have a silhouette, but I don't cut my vinyl pieces in my silhouette typically. I mostly use it for stickers, for print and cut options. And I don't currently pay for the access that is required to upload silhouette with SVG files. So I am sure that there are tutorials out there that can show you how to do this with a silhouette. I just don't personally have those options available to me right now. And because this system works for me for the Cricut, I am not willing to pay additional money on the silhouette to get the same function that I get without paying on the Cricut. So that is why I have talked about being able to do this on the silhouette, but I don't have any tutorials on it right now because I do not own the necessary software upgrades to upload SVG files. And that is such a big proponent of what makes this successful that I want to make sure that I am adhering to that. So the Cricut allows me to do that without an additional subscription fee. So that is the basic rundown. Obviously, the first method, if your pattern is going to be smaller than that 11.5 inches wide, being able to cut the whole thing at once is going to be your best option. Now, for example, if we go back and look at the original one and say we cut just piece number 9 and accidentally broke that while we were grinding it, that just happened to me the other day on a piece on stream, then what I can end up doing is I can just grab that piece itself and send it to Cricut, and then I can just cut out the one piece on its own rather than having to cut out the entire thing. So you can kind of see that that happened to me the other day, that I had uploaded this mermaid sun catcher and then I broke piece number 1 right here while I was grinding it. So I went through and I just uploaded piece number 1 later, and then just cut that out on its own because I didn't feel like recutting the entire sun catcher. It didn't feel necessary. So you can either upload them all at the same time and then just turn off what you don't need. That can be a little challenging when it's maybe a 100-piece pattern to turn off 100 pieces that you don't need. So you can always upload just a single piece on its own that you pulled out of Illustrator. So you could just upload just this one path. If you needed to just export number 9 again, you could just export that one piece. Piece 9. That would work as well. So all of those are options that will get you to the same result. Just make sure that you're exporting it as an SVG so that it retains its size information correctly. So that is that process. So we took our initial stroke file that we had started with. We added in the number file. Again, if you're looking for this monoline font, I will have it in my Discord. You're welcome to download it. And maybe at some point I'll try to make it look a little prettier, but it is at least totally functional right now. And that helps the Cricut to, not get too overwhelmed with the fancy font, but does also allow you to have those lines underneath already built into the font. So you don't have to add them later for things like your 6s and 9s. But yeah, that is the process of how to put that together. So if there is additional questions that you have on, using those vinyl pieces, going through the rest of the process, I'm happy to continue this and print those out and stick them through the glass and cut and grind that and go through that whole part of the process. But I at least wanted to make sure that we did that last sort of step for people who are interested in using a Cricut for these patterns. Again, you can still use the same process before for printing these. So say if we're looking at this really large 12 inches wide numbers and stroke, if we switch this back over, let's turn off our paths here. Let me just select everything here and turn our compound path back on. And for now, we'll just turn off our other ones so that they're not in the way. If we want to send this whole thing to the printer, and one of the things I realized I should have just considered when I was doing this last time is you can just uncheck or check the ignore artboards, because we were having issues with the artboard kind of throwing things around a little bit. You can just check that box and then it'll totally ignore how large the artboard size is. But same thing, you can go ahead and realign this however you need to. So you can see here it's going to print on 6 pieces of paper, and that's no problem because we used the overlap here. So you can see it's going to double print where all of those pieces overlap with each other. So it'll make it very easy to line this up. So as many pieces as it's going to be to print, not a problem. Then you'll just tape them all together and then you'll be able to use that as a guide. If you want to be able to lay your pieces down, many people want to solder on the back side of their piece first. Not a problem. You can either send it somewhere that you're used to doing sort of a flip, or you can just have Illustrator flip it for you. If you select the whole thing, right click it and transform reflect it, it will just reflect it over. either vertical or horizontal. Vertical is going to be the back side of that piece, and you can just send that to the machine. Obviously, your numbers will all be backwards as well, but that is totally fine. That lets you know that this pattern is currently backwards. So oftentimes I will have both the front and the back of a pattern. So I'll have the front for when I'm aligning things to make sure that I am lining up the right pieces with the right spacing, to make sure that I really did get inside the lines properly, especially if a vinyl piece starts to slide off or anything while I'm going. It does happen. And then I'll usually print another version of the pattern on the back that I can pin the pieces directly into onto my Homosoap board to make sure that they're all lined up, especially when it's a piece like this that has a lot of rounded edges and it's not as easy to pin it between gates or anything like that. So that is the process of taking it from your initial vector pattern to get you into that physical state of sending it to the Cricut machine, with the added benefit of having it draw all of your numbers for you. Let me know if there are other things that you would like me to continue to expand upon, and I will keep making videos as I have a chance. Thanks.